Hey, welcome to Flight Test. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build a tiny trainer. Now the tiny trainer, if you haven't seen the review already, is a one-stop shop for learning how to fly. We wanted to give people the experience to be able to go from 2-channel to 3-channel to 4-channel all in one airframe, much like we did with our 3-pack. But this one, it's a little bit different. With the 3-packs, we taught you one technique at a time. With this plane, you're going to learn every technique of building a model airplane that we use currently in our whole fleet of planes. Now this is a mini, but because it's a mini doesn't mean it's small in personality. You can learn on a 4-channel how to do aerobatics and all the advanced maneuvers that you would with any typical 4-channel trainer. So if you haven't already, download the free plans, and if you haven't already, get your power pod built. There's going to be a separate video, and also, if this is your first build, we're going to have a whole bunch of links down below. You not only want to build your power pod, but if you've never built a plane before, you're going to need to know how to center your servos and hook up your electronics. There's also going to be a video for that, and if you've never flown before as well, we have a beginner series we're going to link directly to, because this is a perfect plane if you've never flown before, never built before, to get started with. Now you can download the free plans, or if you want, you can get the speed build kit. That's a lot more convenient, and as of right now, we also carry our electronics packs with a LiPo bag included into it. Now this electronic packs actually includes more than what you need. What we wanted to do was give you everything you're going to need to build, but also build up an arsenal. So we included more servos than you need, so you can actually build both wings with this design. Now this plane may be small, but this actually takes up more foam because it has 2 separate wings that we're going to be building today than our Spitfires and some of our bigger planes. We designed it to be able to go into schools, to community outreach groups, and to different centers so that people can build together and have fun together. This plane can be a chuck glider if you have a young one you're building with and you want to build a plane and have an experience of flight with them, but they're not ready for the controls, and it can go all the way up to 4 channels. Let's get your materials in order and we'll get started. The first thing we're going to start off with is the fuselage. Now normally we do the wings, but we actually have 2 different wings and 2 different noses to go on this airplane. So the fuselage in this case is going to be the common item. So pop out your stabilizer and your elevator, and notice when you look at the lines here that this can be built with a chuck glider. So we don't take our hinge line all the way to the edge from edge to edge. So if you're building this with a young one or as a school project, you don't need to break these lines at this time. Also follow the different score cuts with your razor blade so the paper will peel out easier. If you're building this off the plans, black is cut through, red is score cut, and blue is an etch line or a crease line. So after we score cut and follow everything over with the razor blade, just cutting it as close to the paper as possible without cutting through. I'm using my nails and I'm just rolling the paper and the foam to separate it. Now if it doesn't come off in one chunk, you can cut it a little bit deeper, get a little closer to the paper, and you can also follow up with your razor blade afterwards and scrape it off. Take your time on this step. The cleaner you get this edge, the better everything's going to fit together and the nicer it's going to look. Make sure you take your time and get these channels as clean as possible. You want a nice tight fit when you fold this fuselage together. Now you've already learned the A fold with your power pod. We're going to learn a B fold next. Now a B fold is where the side cheeks are beside the bottom or top plate. So just think B besides. Got a great community member to thank for that. But before we go ahead and roll this up, you notice that there's a blue line here, which is an etch on the speed build kits. We're going to go ahead and just take this little foam triangle. I'm going to hold it over here right to the line, and we're going to lift this up. Now all this is doing is telling the foam where we want it to bend. If you're scratch building this, you're going to notice this is a blue line. Might as well do the top plate too. There we are. Now we're ready to go ahead and test fit. Before we put glue down, we want to make sure everything fits nice, and we got to get used to the motion and check for the fit. So we're going to start with this one here. I'll roll it around like this. We're going to start with the side plate furthest away from the top plate, and we're going to roll that up and make sure that the fit is to our liking. Now the reason we included this in the kit, and if you're scratch building this, I'd strongly recommend getting a triangle square, is so we can hold this right up against the fuselage and take our time and get it 90 degrees. The more true you can build your fuselage, the better everything is going to fit and look on your plane. Happy with that? Let's check the other side. We're happy with this. And we're happy with that fit. Okay. Make sure you have a nice hot glue gun ready. And a lot of people have a tendency that they want to fill up this cavity with hot glue. You don't need to do that. Because this is a B fold, if you look at the diagram here, the major portion of the glue joint is going to be on the side. So we're going to put the glue primarily on the side right here, and we're just going to put a nice bead down, roughly about a 1/16 of an inch wide. You'll see here, we're just going to flow along. We're not worrying about filling up that whole cavity. And we're putting most of our glue, not on the paper, but on the foam itself. We're going to lay it flat, use the table as our friend. We're going to roll it up 90 degrees, and we're going to follow all the way back, making sure that we let the side plate follow the contour of the bottom plate. This is why it's important to practice this a couple times over, so you're used to the motion that you need to do. Now if you notice, I started my glue joint, ended my glue joint just shy of the end point. That's so when I fold this up, glue doesn't squeeze out and glue to the table. If it does glue to the table, just use a rocking motion and break it free. Don't ever try to lift straight up or pull it off really aggressively. Just rock it back and forth. Don't be in a hurry with your glue either. Make sure it's nice and dry before moving on to the next step. Now if you notice here while we're popping pieces out, there's this portion right here. We're going to cut this free later on, but not until the fuselage is assembled. So go ahead and leave this in for the time being. We're going to repeat the next process, once again, focusing most of our glue on the side foam cheek. You don't want to try to have to force that hot glue up and around. It's better to let it squeeze out the top than try to make a 90-degree bend. Lay it on the table. Back to 90, squeezing in. And at this point here, what I like to do is actually put the top plate in, and it gives me something to squeeze up against. And always make sure you follow up with your little 90-degree foam block. Once you're happy there, check it through the whole entire fuselage. Now it sounds kind of crazy, but a lot of people want to rush the part of glue drying. It sounds crazy, but if you just hum or think the song "You Are My Sunshine" in your head, that'll give you enough time to let the glue dry. The side cheeks are done, but before we fold this over and finish off the fuselage, we need to put our push rods in here. And because the push rods are long, you don't want them to bend inside the fuselage like this. Now with your Z-bend on the outside of the fuselage, and if you guys are wondering what a Z-bend is, this is the part that hooks into your control horn. This is ultimately going to be what pushes your controls back and forth and makes them deflect while they're in the air. This is going to be outside the fuselage, so we're going to guide it through this way. I like to take the tip of this and drag this through. Now if you're building this as a chuck glider, you don't really need to worry about this step, but if you have the kit, it doesn't hurt to put it in, because then it's easier to convert in the future to RC. To reinforce the push rod, we're going to go ahead and use these little spacer discs, and we're going to knock these out. Now you can see that there's a little channel cut in here. We're going to remove that foam. And because we don't want the push rod to bind inside of here, in your kit you're going to have a little coffee stir included. That's going to sandwich around the foam just like this. Now I'm using, for this application, a lot of people want to know what glue guns we're using. This is a 40-watt AdTech, and it works really good for small applications. They also have an AdTech Pro 100, which works wonderfully. But since we do a lot of bigger builds like the Guinea Pig and the Kraken, I really love the Pro 200. It's about $40 and worth every penny, and we're yet to burn one of these out. You're going to find if you go with the smaller guns, it costs about $10. They do tend to wear out after about 6 months, depending on how much you use them. But for right now, on the smaller build, we're going to go ahead and use this. And I'm going to lay a little tiny bead down, and I'm going to lay this straw right over top of it and lay it flat on the table and let it dry. While we're at it, I'm just going to go ahead and do both of them. Laying it down this way is going to make sure that you don't get it inside the straw. If your push rod binds on you, it's going to overstress the servo, and that's going to cause it to break and fail. We're going to cut this flush, and this will now be our guide that we can pass the push rod through. We're going to pass this push rod through and then place some glue on here, and then line up our little reinforcement disc with the square that's etched in the side of the fuselage. Once again, etch marks and indicator lines are going to be marked as blue on the plans or an etch mark on the speedboat kit. Now your push rod's going to have no resistance. Go ahead and repeat the exact same process on the other side. So this time, the only difference is we're going to do both sides at the same time. Make sure you test fit it, make sure you're happy, and make sure it's square. Once again, focusing most of the glue on the foam. I'm going to start on the innermost, stop just shy of the edge, and repeat the exact same process on the other side. Just shy of the edge. Now be careful, at this point you can burn yourself pretty easy because the glue is facing upward. And this is also the last chance you're going to have to make sure that your fuselage is nice and square. One thing I like to do is take your square, just run it down. Your edges should be nice and sharp, and when you hold the square up, hold it true. Go ahead and check in different areas, making sure it's nice and true. This is the last joint you're going to have to make the square. Afterwards, it's going to be very, very strong and very hard to adjust. Now that we have our fuselage done, our next step is to work on the tail surfaces. Now this is your elevator. This is going to make your plane go up and down. And we need to have this control surface move unless you're using it as a chuck glider. If you're using it as a chuck glider, you can leave this portion alone, and as you glide it and get your test glides underway, you'll crack it loose and make your adjustments then. But we're going to make this radio controlled, so we're going to crack this loose. Easiest way to do that is hold it at the edge of the table, a little bit of downward pressure, pops free just like that. The next process we're going to show you is how to make this move. If you move this up here, you can only go one direction. The elevator needs to move both up and down to guide the plane upwards and downwards while it's in flight. The way we're going to do this is on the elevator side. This is your stabilizer, this is your elevator. We're going to cut a bevel. And the way we're going to do that is there's two ways. You can use a sanding block, and you can sand this down to the edge of the paper here, or we can use a razor blade. And I'm going to show you to do the razor blade, but it's very important that you be very careful. Make sure your thumb is not at the very edge, so you cut into your thumb. Make sure you keep everything back away from the razor blade. And always look ahead of where your razor blade is cutting. If you're staring at the razor blade, you're more likely to run into something, but if you're looking ahead of where the razor blade is cutting, you're more likely to get everything out of the way before you cut. Now unfortunately, it's impossible to cut this away from you like you should be, so you want to cut parallel to your body. So we're going to go ahead and extend this razor blade quite far, and keeping this parallel to our body, we're going to slide the razor blade with the longest portion of the blade going through the foam. We're not going to hold it at a 90-degree angle. We're going to hold it at about a 45 to 50-degree angle, just like you see here. Now don't worry if you don't get through in one cut. You can always go back and shave off a little more. You want to get the bevel as close to the paper as possible, so when you unfold this, you have nice deflection both ways with no resistance. This should move freely both directions without any binding. Now if you cut through the paper, don't worry about that. You can always go back with a piece of tape on this side and repair it. We're going to repeat the exact same process here with the elevator, but this time I'm going to show you how to do it with a sanding block. We're going to crack it loose, fold it over. Now what this is called is this is the fin and this is the rudder. The fin is going to give it stability, tracking straight, and the rudder is going to make you go left and right. That controls your yaw. And I just took a scrap piece of plywood, wrapped it with about 120 to 100 grit sandpaper that's coarse. With sanding motion, we're just going to sand the bevel in it. Now it's a little bit dirty, a little bit loud, but it's a lot safer. And we're sanding this foam just down to where the paper starts, at about a 45-degree angle. There we are. You can see it does the exact same job as a razor blade, just takes a touch longer, but it's much, much safer. Now we're going to join the elevator and the rudder together. Before we do, we got to cut this portion out right here. Let's go ahead and do a dry fit here. We're going to want to make sure this is glued nice and perpendicular to the elevator. Alright, we're happy with the fit. We're going to put some glue down here and here. Now because this keel, little wheel skid sticks out the bottom, I'm going to go over to the edge of the table when I place this down. I'm going to follow up and I'm going to hold it tight until it's thoroughly dried at a 90-degree angle. Now before we go ahead and put the elevator or the tail assembly into the fuselage, we need to cut this notch and continue it all the way to the edge. We can even use this as a reference guide if we want. Doesn't have to be perfect, just a couple light drags of the blade. Don't try to do it all in one cut. The reason we left this in here was to make sure the fuselage stayed nice and strong so we can make it nice and true. Our next step is to guide the tail assembly into the fuselage. I'm going to open this up just a little bit and guide the tail assembly in and do a nice dry test fit. Always test fit everything before you put glue on. Once you put glue on, you can't go back and change things. If I'm holding this on, I'm just going to check and make sure that this is perpendicular. Now the easiest way to tell whether this is parallel is when I put this on, The vertical fin and the triangle should be parallel to each other. Once we're happy with that fit, we don't need to take it off. We can just slide it down just a little bit like this. Place 2 beads of glue here. Try not to get it on the fin. And here. We're going to rotate this into place. And we're going to let it dry. Once again, holding this, making sure it stays nice and square. Now we're going to move on to securing the top fin to the fuselage. Go ahead and place a bead of glue, doesn't have to be very thick, right in the corner on both sides. Now you can take a scrap piece of foam here and press that glue into its seam and wipe off the excess. More glue does not mean more strength. Now we're going to go ahead and install the control horns. These are included in your kit. We also have them sold separately, or you can simply cut them out of a credit card if you wish, and just get the shape as close as possible, but keep in mind that's very important for the hole to go directly over the hinge line. If it's not over the hinge line, you're going to get more deflection one way than the other. Now just to practice, we're going to go ahead and take this and we're going to press this into the slot, as you see here. If you see here, the hole is directly right over the hinge line, and we have full motion available. Once we're happy with that, we're going to pop this out. We're going to slide that into our push rod. One more test fit. Full motion, no problem. Now we're going to go ahead and glue it in place. You don't need to put a tremendous amount of glue in here. Just a little tiny drop. The most important thing is that you hold it until it's thoroughly dry. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the elevator. Now the way I like to use this push rod here is I like to keep the wire bend as natural. I don't like to force things too close. So I'm actually going to let the wire stay on the outside and the Z-bend go to the inside. Same process as before. Let's support it through the back as we press it through for a test fit. Make sure we have full motion, no binding, and then we'll glue it in. Now we're going to go ahead and install our servos. Now normally this is saved till the end, but because it's so easy right now to go ahead and put this in, it's going to make the whole build process a lot more gratifying. So if you see here, we picked these on these Emax servos here. We picked these control horns as you see right here. But we don't need to go out all the way edge. The further out you go, the more throw you have, and more throw does not mean more control. If you have too much throw on an airplane, it can cause it to fly poorly. We're actually going to use the very first hole that you see right here. That means we don't need these other two, and we're going to go ahead and remove those right now. Now I don't like cutting too close to the hole that we're going to use, so we're just going to go ahead and go right in the middle of the second hole. Repeat the exact same process on the other side. Now linkage stoppers are included in your kit, but you don't need it in this case. We're actually going to show you how to do a Z-bend. Now at a hobby store you can buy these Z-bend pliers here, and we'll even put a link down below for you. It's a very handy tool if you're going to build a lot of airplanes. I'm going to do one with the Z-bend, and I'm going to do the other one with conventional pliers, just to show you how it's done. Now because the servo is going to engage this way, we want the Z-bend to go vertical. So we're going to hold this vertical. If we held this horizontal, the Z-bend would be horizontal. We're going to place this in with the leading edge of the push rod. We're at the very leading edge of the pliers. We're going to press down. Now to glue the servo in, because it doesn't matter where this goes, we're going to go ahead and remove this sticker here. And we can take some sandpaper or the edge of a razor and rough up the servo. Reason being is we want to give the glue something to stick to. If you want to really go crazy, make sure you have a good adhesion. Rub this with a little bit of alcohol. Now this is why it's so important to have your servo centered. Now we can go in here, we can pass the push rod straight through the control horn. And we're going to do a nice dry fit just like we always do. We're going to want to make sure that the rudder is nice and centered before we glue the servo down. That's going to be what we're striving for. Once we're happy with that, rock the servo forward and take your hot glue gun and just put a nice little drop of hot glue right down on the foam. Now we're going to press the servo up against it and take our good sweet time making sure it's fully dry. You can see I'm pressing that through, and I'm also making sure this is nice and straight. While I'm pressing this, I can even take this right angle gauge and make sure it's not moving. Nice thing about this is you don't have to worry about if you have to line up these push rods just perfect. On builds where you have a set spot and the servo can't go anywhere but that spot, we need to be very careful. We'll show you that on the aileron portion of the aileron wings. Now I'm going to show you how to do a modified Z-bend. A modified Z-bend is an easy Z-bend to do with your pliers because you want to keep the area between the servo as narrow as possible. If it's too wide, it can wander up and down. Our first bend's actually going to be horizontal on this one. I'm going to grab this, I'm going to bend it horizontally, like you see here. Now I'm going to go ahead and bend it vertically. I'm actually, unfortunately, I have to kind of block the camera a little bit. Like you see right here. Now that right there is a modified Z-bend. To make it a conventional Z-bend, we can simply rotate this 90 degrees. But in applications where you want to be able to actually remove the push rod, you can leave it like this. Just make sure there's no torsion on this. Make sure when it's left alone, it rests vertically. If it wants to bend this way, during flight it can easily pop out. So to make this a conventional Z-bend, we're going to grab it, and we're going to slowly twist it like you see here. And then we're going to cut off the excess. Make sure when you cut off the excess that you're not shooting at anybody and you're not pointing it towards yourself. Now we're going to repeat the exact same process as before. We're going to remove the little sticker. If you glue this with a sticker on it, all you're doing is gluing the sticker to the fuselage, not vice versa. Take a little bit of sandpaper, scuff it up. If you don't have any sandpaper, you can carefully take your knife and put some scratches in it. Snaking the fuselage through, dropping it down. You can see it's a little bit more cramped, so we're going to have to be a little bit more careful. We may have to use a little stick to hold it up against it. But the most important thing is that you make sure that this elevator is nice and flat. Once you're happy with that, same process as before. Little drop of glue and set it in place. Don't rush this. If this comes loose in flight, you also lose your controls. Now that your servos and tail sections are done, we're going to go ahead and work on the glider nose. Now you can skip this step if you're going to go ahead and build the power pod, or the powered nose, but I strongly recommend putting it together. And just like before, we're going to use a razor blade and cut most of the way as close to the paper as possible. Now before we fold this together, we're going to go ahead and put these doublers here. Now the doublers serve two purposes. They make the nose incredibly strong, but they also act as a guide for our front cover for our nose plate. So we're going to glue those now, and you can see here on your plans it's a blue reference line. On the kit, it's an inch mark. Go ahead and apply a little bit of glue. You don't have to get too crazy, and try to keep it as thin as possible so it doesn't bubble up. When I have it on here, I like to actually slide it around just a little bit, spread that glue out, and then firmly press down and line it up with the marks. Do one side at a time. Alright, repeat the same process. Same procedure as our B-fold. Make sure you have no remaining foam pieces on your paper. If so, just get rid of it. Use your fingernail or a razor blade. And let's do a practice fit. Make sure when you're doing this, you're using the table as your friend and the side cheeks are sitting fully down on the bottom of the paper. If it's not sitting down on the paper, go ahead and remove a little bit more foam. Same process as before, focusing most of the glue on the side of the bottom plate, one side at a time. Rotate up to 90 and follow up with a little triangle to make sure it stays square. Always use the table as your friend and press down to make sure it's nice and square. Once that dries, we'll repeat the process on the other side. Now we're going to teach you a new technique. Before we go ahead and put this on here, if we tried to bend this piece of foam around, it would crinkle and get very, very blocky and rough. To make this move nice and smooth, we're going to remove this paper. Simple as peeling it right off. Now this edge is going to provide two things. It's going to be a nice covering for this area here, and it's also going to keep this edge from getting sharp. You can reinforce this area with some Scotch tape, or you can use hot glue as well. Just keep in mind, if you do the hot glue step, you're going to get hot glue on the table, so make sure that's okay. If you're doing this at a school, they may not appreciate this. I'm going to lay this on a scrap piece of foam so I don't hurt this table. And with a little scrap piece of foam handy, I'm going to put a small bead of glue here, and follow up and squeegee it right off. Keep squeegeeing until you got most of the glue off. All we're doing is reinforcing that paper. We're going to repeat the same process on the other side. Now we're going to open up this seam or score cut right here, and we're going to reinforce that just by putting a little bit of glue right here. Wipe it off. Now don't fold this back until it's thoroughly dry. We're going to do a test fit now of the bottom plate. And where you had this removed paper in this little seam, it's going to press hard up against the bottom. And we're just going to go ahead and set this down here. Now the reason we move this paper is just so this can bend. But the first thing we want to do before we bend this is fasten this in so we have an anchor point to keep everything square and true. So we're just going to put a little bit of glue. Slide this in and press it hard against the table. Make sure you don't glue it into the table. Once that's glued, we're going to go ahead and do a nice test fit here. We're going to wander this over, and we're slowly going to match the curve of the nose, as you see right here. Make sure you get this curve to the point where you like it before you put glue down. Sometimes it takes a couple little passes, and if you have to, you can use your thumb and actually pre-form it. Once we're happy with that, we're going to open this up as much as possible, and we're only going to put glue to about 1 centimeter or ½ an inch away from that seam. We don't want to glue this portion here. Matter of fact, it's easier if you just keep this portion open. Alright, this portion here, it's very important. You got to commit to it and use a table as your friend. We're going to pull this away, and we're pulling this into the nose. So we can follow up. Now, this technique is used on a lot of different airplanes. It's used on our FT-22. It's used on Peter Treeple's guinea pig, and also his mini guinea. And it's a technique we're going to use a lot. Now, the reason we put so much attention not to glue this portion is because this is going to be our hatch right here. It's very important that this slides down. And we're going to do something a little crazy. We're going to use this little pin here to dowel in to our fuselage. So now would be a perfect time to go ahead and do a test fit. This should slide easily down, and it's going to bottom out right against the doublers here. And if you did everything right and you have the speedboat kit, you're going to find that these holes line up perfectly with each other. And this is going to be what holds your nose in. So we're going to go ahead and tack that down with our barbecue skewers right now. One thing we concentrate, if you've never built one of these before, is we try to use as many common pieces as possible. Something you can go to a hardware store or a craft store or even a supermarket and get. Now, if you're scratch building, one thing I'd strongly recommend is don't worry about putting these holes in ahead of time. Go ahead and puncture this hole, and then without moving it, go around and puncture this hole. That way you're custom fitting it to your model, and it'll pass right on through. Leave a healthy ½ inch or a little over a centimeter on both sides. And the easiest way to cut this is to lay it on a table, take a razor blade, and roll it back and forth. If you break it, it gets fuzzy. Now that we know the one side, we can cut the other side. There's the back. And I'm actually just going to use the pointy side here just to get everything lined up. Go through one side and go through the other. Pass it right on through. This is going to hold your nose on. And also, if you're going to switch from a glider nose to a power nose, simply pull these two barbecue skewers out. One slides out, the new one slides in. Now this is where this little tab comes to play. This tab is going to simply act as a little anchor to keep your hatch down. Now we're going to test fit this little tab before we glue it into the top hatch. There we are. Once we're happy with that, we're going to glue this little guy into the top hatch. Put a little dab of glue here and here. Push it down in. I'm just going to kind of pinch this to a little bit of a point. Now I'm going to go ahead and follow up. I'm just going to keep this from delaminating. I'm going to put a little drop of glue. I'm going to take a little scrap here. Kind of work it around, make sure that paper doesn't delaminate. And it also gives that little tab a rubbery texture that'll grip real nice. You can even secure it a little bit more. Right there. We're going to let that thoroughly dry before we test fit again. But now it's going to be nice and rubbery. It's going to stick really well on here. But when you need to access it, you can pop it right off. Now, if you're building this with someone as a chuck glider, at this point, when we build our wings, we're going to use this area here to put clay into. And we're simply going to take some craft clay and we're going to pack it in the nose here until the plane balances out. That's going to compensate for the electronics that we normally have in here. Now, if you're going to be flying this with RC, you're not going to need your motor, which means you're going to use your ESC, which is your electronic speed control, and you're going to use the BEC, which is a battery eliminator circuit within the ESC. Now that all sounds very confusing, but if you watch our beginner series, it'll explain what these things are and how they're set up. So at this point here, if you want to continue with the glider path, we're going to go ahead and leave the motor, 3 plugs from the motor wires unplugged, and we're only going to use the ESC. Now let's go ahead and put our attention to building the power pod version of the nose. This here is your power pod. As you can see, this is another B folds on this. Just remember, B is besides the bottom plate. If you see an A there, the side cheeks are above the bottom plate. We're also going to get our little doublers here. They're going to look a little different than our nose, but it's going to be the exact same process. Okay, we'll go ahead and go right into it. This is just like the fuselage. Should be really comfy for you. We'll start with the furthest away from the complicated folds. Focusing on the side cheek once, or the side of the bottom plate once again. Starting and stopping just before the edges. Rotate to 90 and hold with your gauge. Always make sure that you push down and make sure everything's seated nice and firm against the table. Repeating the same process on the other side. Pushing against the table, straight down against that table, get it nice and square. And holding it with the triangle. And our last step will be to complete the process, just like we did with the fuselage, on both sides. Now we can use the table as our friend here. We're going to fold it over, press it against the table, hold it this way. At this step, oftentimes I like to stick to the table. Once again, just a little bit of rocking motion will break it free. And a cool tip for cleaning your table, Peter Schriepel showed us, if you just wet it with a little bit of alcohol, the glue softens right up. We're going to go ahead and just do a nice dry fit here just to make sure everything fits nicely. But these should slide in and meet up right with the edge. Once again, this is a backing plate for when the fuselage slides in. This is also a doubler to give your fuselage tons of strength. That way, if God forbid you do have a crash, you have a lot of impact and the load is transferred from here all the way through the side plates, all the way through your fuselage, and it'll last a lot longer. We're happy with the fit. We're going to glue it in. And if you noticed here, I haven't even fully used the second stick yet. So just keep in mind that you don't have to use a lot of hot glue in order to build these planes. I'm going to slide this around. This is a little bit more important than the glider nose to make sure this full area is nice and tight against itself, because you're going to see it. So I like to make sure I keep pushing down on this, keep holding. Check it on the other side. We're going to repeat the exact same process with this plane. It's always a handy thing to keep the scraps from your kit or from your build laying around. I'm going to go ahead and just cut this to a 90 and make another little scraping pad here. Now, because this area here is going to be taking a lot of beating, I want to reinforce it. And this is something you can do with your whole entire airframe. You just don't want to add too much weight to it. I'm going to go ahead and take this, and I'm going to lay a bead right down the center line, and then I'm going to smear that glue all up and down this area and make it like it's one piece. And the last step we're going to do is we're going to go on the outside, we're going to scrape it clean, and press it all back together. That's going to make a very, very strong nose for you and keep this whole area from delaminating. Repeat the same process on the other side. This area is going to be taking most of the abuse of the airplane as you land, possibly as you dive into the ground, so it's really important to take your time and build this area up. So here are the noses side by side. You can notice that the shape is drastically different. That's because of thrust line and thrust angle, and also allowing the electronics in the battery to be changed out easily. If you're going to be flying this as a free flight, I strongly recommend using the glider nose. This nose here is not going to be as friendly, and it's also going to cause more drag. Now to remove this nose, we're simply going to go ahead and remove the barbecue skewers, pop open the hatch, and slide it out. Let's go ahead and test fit this one. Same process as before, and if we did our job right, this should slide with a little twisting motion right on through. I'm going to use a pointy remnant here of a barbecue skewer just to make sure we find that hole nice and easily. There we are. Now, if you haven't noticed before, these holes here are empty. This is actually so you can stick your finger and you can throw the plane with a little bit more force. If we did our job right, as we pop these out and peel these back, you're going to notice that they're right on top of each other. That's exactly what you want. While we're at it, we might as well remove the little hole on the other side here too. Now that we have both noses built, we're going to go ahead and beef them up just a little bit more. Might as well do this step on both of them at the same time. And for that, we're going to go ahead and use packaging tape. Because this is always going to be landing in the grass sometimes may be moist or dirty. It's very easy at this point to reinforce it with a little bit of tape. And you notice here I left this a little bit on the long side because I can fold it in. Bevel cut here. Wrap that right around here. Alright, let's go ahead and cut out our little launching thumb grip here. May not hurt also, just roll this around. Make it soft. So when you put your hand in there, it's not sharp. Same process on the other one here. So we have both of our noses done in our fuselage. It's time to move on to our wing. We're going to start with the simple free flight or the 3-channel wing. This wing has no control surfaces on it, and the tips are going to angle up for more stability. That's called polyhedral. If it was dihedral, you'll see that on the aileron wing. Let's go ahead and break it free. So these are the pieces to the wing. The first step we're going to do is we're going to join these two halves together. To do this, we're going to go ahead and glue it together, but we need to get these lined up perfectly. The way we're going to do that, we're going to take a couple small pieces of tape, we're going to line this up, push the edges together, and seam it down. We'll do this on the leading edge and the trailing edge. Now we're going to join the two together with a full length of tape. Once this is taped together, you're going to have a nice hinge like this. We're going to go and open this up. We're going to put a bead of glue right in the middle here. And we want to put a little bit of a generous amount of glue, but don't put it on the tape or it could melt through. Put it mainly on one side of the foam. Once we have that, we're going to lay this flat. And you can see that this is popping out. This is the one thing I tell you not to do, but in this case we want that. So I'm going to grab a scrap piece of foam board and smear it nice and flat. It's going to make a very strong glue joint. We can now take the extra pieces and we can actually fold this over and work it down. Go ahead and hold this flat with your hands until it's thoroughly dry. Now that the glue is dry, we're going to take this to the edge of the table. We're going to crack the leading edge free from the wing, just like we were with our elevator and our rudder. Now, as we did before with putting a bevel, the only difference is we're going to be putting a double bevel. That means we're going to cut a bevel here and a bevel here. We can do this once again by using a razor blade or by using a sanding block. I'm going to go ahead and do it with a razor blade at the edge of the table. Now, if this blade here is balling up the paper or it's really tough to pull through, that means you have a dull blade. Dull blades are much more dangerous than sharp blades. So make sure that if this is dull, that you replace it. Now that we have our double bevel cut, we're going to go ahead and just in this area where we smeared the glue, we're going to go ahead and just do another score cut in these two areas, like you see here. Now we still have this little piece of barbecue skewer floating around, and we're going to open up the channel by dragging it right on through the whole length of the wing. Make sure you don't push it down through the other side and break the paper. This will give the wing a nice curve. Now let's go ahead, before we go any further, and fold this over on top of itself. Nice and flat. Don't try to force this. If it's a little stiff, you can always go back and cut this more shallow. You want to be able to fold this over without very much resistance at all. Now that we're happy and that everything's folding over nicely, let's go ahead and put on our main spar. Now you can see the main spar is just a little bit more narrow than the two seam lines here. We're going to center that up between the two lines. Move around just a little bit, spread that glue out. Line up right at the edge of the seam line here, center it between the two score lines here, and then hold it until it dries. Now we're going to repeat that process, but with these two smaller spars on both sides here. And we put a little edge line. It'll be marked blue on your plans or a score cut on your speed build kit. And we're going to line that up, once again splitting between the two score cuts, and glue it in place. Now this is dry. Once again, we're going to go over and we're going to do a nice dry fit. But this time you're going to notice that the wing actually has a shape that resembles more of a wing and less of a folded piece of foam board. You shouldn't have to fight this portion too much. You should be able to hold this down very easily without putting any crinkles through the foam board. If not, go back and adjust this bevel cut and make it a lot more shallower. Open it up a little bit more so it folds over easier. Now we're ready to fold over the wings, but I'm going to make sure I have an extra hot glue stick next to me here in case I run out. Also, make sure you have a hot glue gun. If you're using the real small sticks, you may not want to do this step without having two hot glue guns. We use these bigger sticks because they deliver a lot more glue before they cool down. So make sure you have a glue gun that can deliver enough glue before you do this step. If you don't, just kind of piece this apart and don't do as many steps at one time. The first thing we're going to do is I'm going to apply a bead of glue with the nozzle pointing pushing down in here. And I'm just going to pump a little bit of glue in here to give it a little bit of strength. This is going to add a tremendous amount of strength to the wing and also keep it from warping very easily. Ready? So as you can see, I'm pushing this nose down. I'm not trying to put a huge amount. I'm just tracing right along, letting that bevel in here. I'm going to quickly do one more stripe on the other side. This is a technique that is used in almost all of our airplanes to give a tremendous amount of strength, especially the versatile. I'm going to fold this over before it dries, and I'm going to hold this down just like this. Make sure your whole entire wing shares the same shape all the way out to your wingtips. Make sure the back trailing edge of the wing is flat against the table. Once that's thoroughly dry, make sure your glue gun's fully recovered and can deliver more glue. We're going to repeat the exact same process, except this time we're going to put a bead down the leading edge and the main spar. Leading edge first. Now the main spar. Keep in mind, the more glue you put down, the longer it's going to take to dry. So don't hurry about this one. You may have to put a couple songs in your head now. Now we're focusing most of our pressure here on this main spar to make sure it's flat against the bottom plate. And also putting attention on the back trailing edge to make sure it's flat against the table. That means your wing is nice and straight and true. Once it's thoroughly dried, you should be able to lift up and it shouldn't spring back. If it does, continue to hold it down. Now we're going to go ahead and check this out. And if we did this right, what you're going to see is the center spar is going to be flat against both the bottom and the top of the wing. Now comes the fun part. We're going to put polyhedral into this. These little triangles that you can now see that have been cut out, we're just going to go ahead and clean that extra foam out. Most likely it's stuck in there just a little bit. I'm just going to kind of knock it out there. I'm going to do that on both sides. There we are. There we go. When we do that, we should be able to move the wing up like this. This is where our dihedral gauge comes into play. This is included in your kit and also on your plans. It's very important that you cut this out. And if you're building a scratch build, at very least, take a measurement reference. This is going to go right underneath here and hold the proper polyhedral into the wing. Dihedral is 1 break in the wing, polyhedral is 2. So if you have polydihedral, that means you have 3 breaks in the wing. If you have a dihedral gauge, we're happy with the way this sits. Our next step is to go ahead and put our bead of glue right down within this crack. Once again, when you put down more glue, that means more dry time. Give this a good 4 minutes. I'll set this right up on that rearmost seam line. We're also going to take a little scrap piece of foam and smooth out that glue. It's so important that you don't rush this process. Let it thoroughly dry and be very strong before you move it. And go ahead and put a little weight on it. Like a transmitter. We're going to go ahead and just set this tape in our while it's drying. Pull it nice and tight. And then loop it around to the bottom. And fold this end over as well. That'll give you an immense amount of strength. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. Now it's time to use this remaining piece of the stick. Go ahead and cut off the pointy end. This is going to be used as a reinforcement for our wing. When the rubber bands fasten these on, it can dig into this foam on the back. So we're going to glue this against the trailing edge here, so as the rubber band goes over, it doesn't dig into the foam. To do that, we're going to go ahead and just cut this little portion right here so it can seep back down in there. Bit of glue. Press it in. I'll use a scrap piece of foam here so don't burn your fingers. And we'll follow it up with a little piece of tape. Our trainer wing is now complete. This will work great on the glider and also with the power pod as well too. let's go ahead and build the advanced wing. Now this is our second wing here. You can notice that this has aileron cutouts here. Now the aileron cutouts are not fully cut out because the wing is so small. We need to keep this as one piece until the wing is thoroughly done. So don't go ahead and cut these ailerons out and make them loose, or it's going to be much more difficult putting the wing together. Let's go and pop it out. Alright, so this process is going to be the exact same as before with a couple little twists, but we're going to start by the same by joining the two wings together. This should be very familiar by now. Going to join the two wing halves together. We'll just tack the front edge here. Line it up the best we can. Push them together. And go to the trailing edge right here. Push it together. We're going to follow up. Smooth this out with a piece of scrap. Now here's where a little bit of the difference comes to play. You're going to notice here, very, very hard to see, but there's a slight gap right here. We're not going to want to put glue beyond this point and beyond this point right here. This is going to be where we're going to fold the wing and join it together. So up to about a ½ inch here and a ½ inch there. Once this is thoroughly dried, we're going to fold the tape over. Now as before, this needs to fold on the leading edge, which is right here. So we're going to go back, we're going to do a little bit of a score cut right through the area that our glue is smeared into, and we're going to fold it in half at the edge of the table. Once again, the score cut's going to go down just to the edge of the paper, and we're going to make that as wide as possible so the wing can fold over easily. You can do this again with a razor blade, make sure it's sharp, or a sanding block. Shallow angle, looking ahead of where you're cutting, just above the paper. That's one side. We're going to repeat the process on the other. Now I'm just holding this off the table just to make this a little bit more visible on what I'm doing. Strongly recommend that you do it while resting on the table. And if you go through the paper, you can always fix it with a little piece of tape. Now this is a portion where things are going to be a little bit different from the first wing that you built again. Normally I have you take a barbecue skewer and open up these crevices and then fold it over and get the shape of the wing, but because this wing needs to be so narrow because it's a little bit more high performance and it glues at the rear trailing edge, we want to go ahead and fold this over now. So take this over and don't try to push it all down at once. Just work it down nice and smooth and then put a lot of your energy into this leading edge right here. Making sure it doesn't fight you too much and it's nice and round and crisp. If it's really hard to do this and the foam is wanting to wrinkle, go back and open up that area a little bit more in this area here. That looks good. Now we're going to go ahead and we'll take a barbecue skewer and we'll open up this cavity. Now when we fold this over, you're going to see that the wing will take shape, but it's very, very narrow, and that's what we want. We want this to be a little bit of a speedier, high-performance wing, and that means a little bit less lift, a little bit less drag. Just like before, we have some spars, but there's two different shapes here. The first one here, you can see can't line up easily here. It's going to line up right here. Same as before, we're going to line it between the etch marks and between the two score lines. Right in the middle. This area is going to be left open. Now we could have made this work off of one servo, but two things. The lightweight servos, we don't want to overstress them, and anytime you move a servo here, it's a lot more difficult to move the ailerons cleanly out there. So we try to get the servos as close to the center, but I didn't want you to have huge extensions. So what I did is I moved them just enough to make it meet. And also, if you really want to get advanced, now you can separate these two from no longer having a Y, and you can work with flaps and reflex. Now for this portion here, it's a little bit different. We're actually just going to line these up on the outer two edges here. It can go closer to the seam line than further in. Reason being is we want to keep this channel open for our aileron wire to pass through. Make sure you don't burn your hands on this step. One here. Keep that cavity clear. One right here. Now when we have our servo wire, we can feed that servo wire right through this area and pop it out of this hole. Same process on the other side. And you can see these ends are buttoned up. It's going to crush a little bit. We're going to actually open this up just enough to get the glue in and hold our dihedral. All the strength from this wing is really from the foam meeting up against each other. This is just holding the shape of the wing. The reason we have this seam here and it's not a solid piece is we do need it to crush against itself. So now that the wing shape is done, I'm going to go ahead and just cut this area out here. It's going to be a little bit easier than trying to cut through the wing. We don't want to remove some of these areas ahead of time because it actually gives us strength and helps us align things. There we are. You can see I don't have to fight this. The wing's taking a nice natural shape all by itself. So now we're going to follow the same procedure as before. We want to go ahead and establish the angle of this wing. We're going to make sure we have plenty of hot glue, which we do. And we're going to bury our tip in this cavity that we opened on both sides. You can see I'm moving quick. I'm not putting a huge amount in, just enough. The more you press that tip in there, the better your results are going to be. If it's a little excess, just wipe it off. Now we're quickly going to fold it over and hold the shape into the wing. Now that we're happy with the shape of our wing, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put a bead here and a bead here, here, and then we're going to save this for the very last step after we glue all this down. This is only our third hot glue stick in this whole build. Starting with the leading edge, go into the main spar, ruining that rubber tip apparently. Our favorite glue gun, we've been trying different ones. Our favorite one so far is the AdTech Pro 200. But this one's working pretty good. Now we're going to hold this down just as we did before. Our last step is to go ahead and put a bead of glue right on this rear seam. Make sure that your table doesn't have any glue balls that are going to dent your wing. Alright, for this, if it's seated really well and it's really tight, just go ahead and push against the top of the wing. It's going to open up just a little bit and allow that glue to seep in there. And then as it's upside down, hold it down. Now our wing has shape, it's time to put the dihedral in it. We're going to want to go ahead and put a slice down here to open up this wing area here, just as you see. Once we do that, when we pick this up, this portion of the wing should bend nice and freely, but it should start crushing pretty nicely and be pretty tight around this area right here. The dihedral gauge is going to be the exact same dihedral gauge that we used when we were doing our polyhedral. So I hope you hold on to that. Process is going to be the exact same. Crack this wing open a little bit. Lift it up. Even bend it just a little bit beyond. And smooth out the rest of the glue here. So again, we'll go back to our transmitter. Use it for weight. 4 minutes. Go get a Mountain Dew. Alright, so we're going to go ahead. The glue is dry. We're going to reinforce it with some more tape. I'm going to use the wider this time. work it down here. Here we are. It's amazing how much strength the tape adds, so don't neglect this step, especially on this wing, because you're going to be able to do aerobatics with this. Let's go ahead and open up these areas here. Now if you look down here, you have an open channel through this area. You can also use your push rod to fish these tapes. And we're going to go ahead and use the little servos that are included in our power kit. Now these are appropriately sized for a plane like this, but you can put all the way up to 9 gram. Just be aware that they're going to stick out a little bit. 5 gram is optimal. These are 4.7 gram, so they're nice and slim, but they're also digital and quite strong. So for the aileron servos, I'm going to use the linkage stoppers included in our electronics pack. You only need 2 of them. Make sure you drill out your control arm to allow the linkage stopper to slide through and not bind up. For this servo, I'm drilling out the second hole, basically the middle one. You could choose to go ahead and make a perfectly sized push rod, but it's a lot more difficult to do, and since you have linkage stoppers, you can adjust them in the future to get it just perfect. Now I'm going to take the extra push rod that we have, and I'm going to go ahead and just put a little hook in this. I'm going to slide this through so I can hook the servo arm. I'm going to slide this through so I can hook the servo extension. Just like that. Make sure you don't hurt your servo. Alright, we'll guide this down. Pop it right out on the other end. Now we can see that this sits down. You can see that this hole is much bigger than we need. This is because you can go up to a 9 gram servo. I'd strongly recommend when staying with 5 gram. This is a 4.7 digital, very strong. But go ahead and stay with the smaller servo if you can, and then you can cover it up with a piece of tape and keep it nice and aerodynamic. Alright, I already moved the sticker and scratched it up. So a little drop of glue, and we'll press it in place. Now that our servos are in, we're going to go ahead and cut the ailerons free and cut our bevel. Just help the score cut a little bit, just so we don't put any wrinkles in the wing. There we are. And just like before, we're going to cut a nice bevel. You can see that I wasn't able to get to the edge. We'll go ahead and turn this around and get the other edge here after we get this first cut. There we are. Now, this kind of rubs against itself. Take the push rod that you have and drag it through this area here. Just open up those 2 cavities. You can use a barbecue skewer, whatever you have. Just make sure it doesn't bind up. Let's repeat this process on the other side. Next step is to install the control horns. We're going to go ahead and break them free, get any extra little splinters off of them. And we're going to repeat the same process that we did on our elevator and on our rudder. Go ahead and let this hang off the edge. Let's do a test fit real quick. Looks good. So what we're going to do right now is we're happy with the fit. We're going to go and place this into our control horn. Let's go ahead and feed it through our linkage stopper. A little drop of glue. And seat it right down in there. Now we can come back, servo centered up, cut it off. Once this is centered, we're going to go ahead and just tighten it up. Now if you turn this on and your ailerons move, loosen this nut, center it up, and retighten it. Don't try to trim it out when you have a linkage stopper that you can adjust it. Try to always keep your trim centered so you have maximum adjustment in flight. Let's repeat the process on the other side. Now that our servos are in, we're going to go ahead and reinforce the trailing edge here just to keep it nice and durable. But this time we've got to be careful that we don't go too big. So I'm going to cut this just slightly smaller than the space between the 2 ailerons. Ailerons are what bank your airplane left and right. So rudder yaws, elevator just the pitch, and ailerons adjust the bank. Now this wing, since we have 2 servos in here, we can actually go through some pretty advanced setups as you become more of an advanced pilot. You can use flaps, flaperons, different mixes like that with an advanced radio. So this wing's definitely going to be relevant through much of your life once you move beyond 3-channel. Just like before, we're going and we're sitting this little guy right down here on the trailing edge. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bend this and just give a little bit of a crack right in the middle. Like that. That's my dog Max. He barks. That's what he does. Alright, we have our little bent skewer dropped in here. Just going to cover it up with a little piece of tape like we did before. There we are. Now because we're not doing any advanced setups, I'm going to go ahead and take a Y connector right now. If you guys have our electronics kit, it's right here. A little bit thicker gauge wire, reason being is as you guys go ahead and build different airplanes and you get more and more electronics packs, we want you to be able to use common packs. If you go to a larger scale plane and you have wires this thick and you put it on there, you're going to have a failure. So it's a little bit heavy, a little bit overkill, actually a lot overkill, but this is what we include in our kit, so that way there's no way that you're going to have any problems in the future if you say you put this on a storch or something. There we are. Alright, the wing is officially done and ready to mount. So right here we have our trainer wing. This has no control surfaces. So if you fly this as a glider, it's technically a 2-channel. Your rudder and your elevator are providing your controls. And this is going to give you a nice even coordinated bank. If you fly this as a motor glider, where you put the motor, now you effectively have 3 channels. Your throttle, your rudder, and your elevator. And then if you move to this wing, you have 4 channels. Now the important thing, and especially if you're going along with our beginner series, whenever you fly a 4-channel airplane, your rudder control, which is on your right stick on a 3-channel, becomes your 4th channel on your left stick, and the aileron takes its place. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this up. I have no one to really tow me up and no high starts, so I'm going to set this up as a motor glider, and we're going to go ahead and test this wing out first. But we're going to set up the aileron channel on your receiver for the rudder. Before we put this power pod in, I'm going to go ahead and put a piece of Velcro on the bottom of this. This is where your battery is going to stick. Now this can be ran off of a 2-cell or a 3-cell, and the nice thing is we can use the same prop on either size. This is a 6'3" prop, nice and soft. We're going to lace this down through, and the fuzzy Velcro, or prickly, however you choose to do it, is going to face down towards the bottom. And we're going to push this motor in. So that's okay that it's banking to the right. That's exactly what we want. Once this is seated against the top plate, with a twisting motion, go ahead and make your holes. Now, I pulled my ESC out of this, so make sure you don't spear your ESC. One side first, then the other. Once you have that, you can pass it right on through. Nice thing about these doublers is the glue that you spread out in between them actually keeps those shafts from popping out. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and cut 2 to this length. We don't need a super large amount of length here, so I'm going to keep this fairly small. One thing you never want to do is you never want to leave the pointy ends on your skewers. If you catch it or you run into someone, God forbid, it can hurt them. We're going to cut 2 sticks the same size. Go ahead and pass this through. One, 2. It's not going anywhere. Alright, we want our battery lead to go forward. So we're going to go ahead and snake this forward and grab a hold of it. And I like to let my ESC kind of dangle just in this little area here, just so it gets a little bit of airflow. If you push it back up here and keep it out of the airflow, it can overheat. And it's not healthy to make them last a long time. So just get this enough and let this back part here just be free in the wind. Now we're going to go ahead and let gravity do the work. And pass this through until it stops. And you know we stopped when all the holes line up. Now we're ready to make the connections with our receiver. The receiver is what's going to take the transmitter signal and convert it to language that the servos will understand to control the functions. So when you give aileron or rudder, it reciprocates. The first thing we want to hook up is the speed control. That's easy, that's because it's coming from the front. We're going to go ahead and plug this into our little tiny 6-channel here. Now on this one, channel number 1 is throttle. Every radio is a little bit different, always read your manual beforehand. And if you haven't seen the beginner series, we talk about different receivers and different layouts. Channel 2 is aileron, but since it's a 3-channel, we're going to connect that to the rudder. The easiest way to find out what the rudder is by just taking one of these and just wiggling it. There it is. It's the one on the right. Our last one is going to be the elevator, and that's channel number 3. Now when you route your receiver, make sure that the wires don't tangle up with the push rods. So what I like to do is I like to fold these wires forward because we have plenty of room up in the nose, and let the antenna go out the bottom. Just like that. Now radio's already bound, it's time to power this up and make sure all of our controls are running the proper direction. Now that beeping that you're hearing, this Grappner actually has telemetry in this tiny little receiver. Every receiver has telemetry, so this is just saying, hey, I'm not talking to the receiver. We want that to be able to talk, so we're going to make this connection. First thing I got to do, put some Velcro on the new battery. Here we go, we're going to make our connection. If you already followed through the electronics video, you should have already done the ESC calibration, and this should feel pretty comfortable for you. There we are. What ESC calibration is where your transmitter and your receiver basically know where the endpoints are. And if you notice here, this battery fits down just perfect. It's just wide enough to sit down nice and snug. Now the position of your battery, if you're using a bigger or heavier battery, that's what adjusts your CG. We're going to go ahead and put our wings on right now, but before we do, let's just go ahead and make sure everything's going the right way. When you pull back on the stick, the elevator should go up. That's backwards. When you push to the right, the rudder should go right, and that's backwards. So we're going to go ahead and program that right now. Now keep very careful. When we're going in reverse and things, I strongly recommend that you remove your props. We're going to go to servo setting. We're going to go to S1 is the S1 is throttle. We don't want to touch that. We want to go to elevator. We're going to hit enter. And I'm going to reverse that. Now the rudder's working the right way. Now we're going to go ahead and hit enter again, take it off of that, go down one more, hit enter, and switch that. Now the elevator's going the right way. So now our controls are going the right direction. It's very important, especially if you're a beginner, that this has enough throw. Now this here, if you look, little throw gauge we have in here, low and high. We're going to set this for the low throws. I'm going to strongly recommend that you start out with that. And we want to adjust it so it only goes to this portion here. Now that's done through your dual rates. You can adjust your dual rates, or you can just simply move this area, pop off your control horn, and move your linkage in further. The further in and closer you move it to the servo, the less throw you have. The closer you move it on the control horn, and in this case you only have one hole, the more throw you have. So if you want less throw, you either move it in on the servo and out on the control horn. In this case, you can only adjust the servo, and that's the way we like it. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust it this time through my radio, because when I put my aileron wings on, I want to be able to have high rates, which is what this is currently adjusted to. We're going to do the same process with the rudder. We got our high rates. Which is perfect. And then we'll adjust to low rates. Every radio is different. Dual rates is what you're going to want to adjust. That's just like the amount of throw if you're using a computerized radio. So now we're going to adjust our high rates. And then our low rates. And the way that is done, we're going to go over to dual rates and expo. Enter into there, And now we can adjust our ailerons, and we have to select the switch. Well, we gotta go enter. We're gonna select the switch we want. I want it on this one. Now we have our switch selected. When I have it high, that means high rates. When it's low rates. That's what I want to adjust. So now as we lower our rates, you can see that we're gonna lower this to the point where the low rates touch it. Just a little bit more. There we go. Every radio is different. This is just how the Graupner does it. A Futaba, a Spectrum is all going to be a little bit different, but this is the one that we're working on right now. So now we're going to do the same process with the elevator. Now our controls are all set, our dual rates are dialed in, it's time to test fly it. First wing I'm going to choose is going to be the 3-channel wing because of the way we set up our controls. And if you're a beginner, this is how I'd strongly recommend you start in as well. Take our rubber bands. Nice thing about rubber bands on a beginner plane is if you do cartwheel and hit it, the rubber bands will take the load and let the wing move instead of causing more damage. There we are. And once the wing is on, it's time to check for CG. Now this is designed around taking a 500 milliamp 2-cell. The 2-cell is going to give you a little bit less power. The nice thing is this motor can fly off a 2-cell or a 3-cell, which is really nice. So as you learn to fly this, you get comfortable, put a 3-cell on it, and then have a better experience. Then move to the aileron wing with a 2-cell, get comfortable, and then go back up to a 3-cell again. For the CG, we're going to put our fingers right on the marks, and we're going to want just a touch of nose down. A little bit too much. So I'm going to move this back just a little bit. And there we are. If you've never made in a plane before and you're new to this, we have a really great video on 6 tips for a successful first flight. I definitely encourage you to find it. It goes over a lot of the features we just done and a lot of the steps, but it's always good to use as a checklist to make sure everything's dialed in. You don't want to crash over a missed detail. Alright, let's go ahead and put this to the test. Alright, we're ready for our first test flight. A couple things just to reiterate. Always make sure you throw into the wing with your wings nice and level. If you haven't watched the beginner series before, the link's down below. I'd strongly encourage you to do that. Also, check out the quick tips for a successful first flight. But also, make sure you get enough altitude before you start your turn. Keep it nice and straight. Get some altitude. Always be prepared to back off on the throttle. Once you slow the plane down, even if you hit the ground, it's not going to be that bad. Let's put it up. Alright, let's go put the aileron wings on it. Alright, so we did our test flight with the 3-channel. It was a lot of fun. Now let's go ahead and go to a 4-channel, but also let's go ahead and put it under 3-cell power just to really see what it can do. To do this, I'm going to remove the 3-channel wing, obviously. But as I was talking about before, whenever you go from a 3-channel to a 4-channel, your rudder now goes to your left stick along with your throttle. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to take this out. I want to make sure I disconnect the power here. We're going to remove the receiver. And we're going to take channel 2, which is aileron channel, and we're going to move to channel 4. Now keep in mind it's going to be very important to make sure that all your channels don't need reversed. This is something that you're going to want to check out. Different radios, different setups will require this. So we're going to plug now the ailerons into the aileron channel. So now the way the controls go is your elevator, up and down, nothing's changed. Now you have aileron, and you have rudder, and then throttle. That is how a typical Mode 2 4-channel radio goes. And if you haven't checked out the beginner series, we explain all about that. Alright, because this plane has dihedral and less of it than our previous, it's going to be a little bit more crisp on the controls. And there's a term called bank and yank. What bank and yank is where you're going to actually roll the plane and then use elevator to bring it around. You do have rudder, so you can do something called flying coordinated. That's where you mix rudder and aileron together, and that will give you a nice coordinated turn. Let's go and power it up and see if we need to reverse anything. Alright, same process applies with this as well. We're going to make sure that the plane balances out nicely before we fly it, and we're going to make sure our controls are going the right direction. Alright, our rudder needs reversed. Let's go ahead and check out our ailerons. Now this aileron is up just a little bit too much. That's going to cause something that we don't want. That's going to cause it to bank. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust that now. There we are. Alright, last step. Check our balance point. Got to move it back just a little bit more. This is a heavier battery, so it's going to go back to about right here. Just a touch nose down. That's where we like it. Let's go ahead and take it up for a flight. Alright, let's go ahead and put the 4-channel version up. We have a 3-cell battery, so this should be a little bit faster and a lot crisper in the flight. Alright, let's check out the vertical. And she still slows down nice too. Well, friends, I want to thank you for watching. Whether you're just getting into the hobby, you want to teach someone, you want to throw a chuck glider around, or you're school getting involved with aviation, I want to encourage you to try out the Tiny Trainer. Once again, there's free downloadable plans. We also have the elements that support you if you want to scratch build out of your own foam board. But most of all, we want to get you in the hobby. We want to get you an opportunity to create a memory, and we want to thank you for being part of this family. See you next time.